Chapter 24. Isabella had anticipated the attack, but even so, it was her reflexes that saved her. She dove sideways as Viktor's claws sliced through the air where her throat had been a split second earlier. The whoosh of air displaced by his attack cooled her cheek as she twisted away. She rolled across the metal catwalk, the rough surface scraping her palms and tearing her sleeve, coming up in a crouch with her gun aimed. But Viktor was already in motion again, his body a blur of speed that seemed to bend the shadows around him. "Run!" Mikhail shouted, charging forward to intercept his uncle. The air vibrated with the force of his shout, feral undertones making the word more growl than speech. The two collided with bone-jarring force, the impact reverberating through the metal structure like a thunderclap, shaking loose rust that floated down in a red-brown haze. Isabella scrambled backward as they crashed against a railing, grappling in a deadly embrace. The metal bent under their combined weight, groaning in protest. Viktor's form continued shifting. Not the complete transformation she'd witnessed from Mikhail, but something more grotesque, as though he couldn't fully commit to either form. His face remained mainly human, but distorted, his jaw elongated unnaturally, and his teeth now too numerous to fit properly in a human mouth. His eyes glowed red, with an internal light that spoke of centuries of rage, while his hands had become lethal claws that slashed at his nephew's chest, tearing fabric and flesh with equal ease. He was missing a claw on his right hand. "Such a disappointment," Viktor hissed, his voice retaining its cultured tone despite his monstrous appearance. Vowels were still rounded with aristocratic precision. Each word was articulated with the contempt of old nobility, droplets of saliva flying from elongated canines. The smell of him, that animal musk, now tinged with something rotten, as if his partial transformation had released long-buried decay. "Your father would be ashamed to see what you've become. Protecting humans. Playing at being civilized. You were born a king among wolves, yet you choose to be a shepherd." Mikhail growled, the sound rumbling from deep in his chest, vibrating the air between them. Muscles strained beneath his torn shirt as he pushed back against his uncle's supernatural strength, tendons standing out like cables. A vein throbbed at his temple, teeth bared in a grimace halfway to a snarl. "My father died because of your ambition. Don't you dare speak of him." Isabella edged along the catwalk, searching for a better position. The gun in her hand felt inadequate against the primal violence unfolding before her. A human tool against mythological fury. Metal creaked beneath her cautious steps, forcing her to move slowly to minimize noise. The air filled with the scent of blood, coppery and rich. As both werewolves bled from various wounds, the fluid appearing black in the moonlight. Viktor might be immune to regular bullets, but the pack had insisted she carry special magazines. Silver-tipped rounds that could at least slow him down. "Isabella, find Damon," Mikhail shouted, driving his knee into Viktor's midsection with a sickening thud of impact. Blood already soaked through his shirt, where Viktor's claws had found purchase, spreading in dark stains across the grey fabric. "Upper level, north corner?" Viktor snarled, the sound echoing unnaturally in the cavernous space, bouncing off concrete and metal until it seemed to come from everywhere at once. He twisted with inhuman flexibility to sink his claws into Mikhail's shoulder, tearing through muscle with a wet, ripping sound. His movements had a fluid, almost balletic quality that spoke of centuries of predatory refinement, each motion economical and precisely calculated for maximum damage. Yes, run along, little human. I'll deal with you after I've reclaimed what's mine. Isabella hesitated, torn between helping Mikhail and finding Damon. Her mind calculated odds and outcomes, evaluating the tactical situation with cold precision, even as fear coursed through her veins like ice water. Mikhail was stronger and younger, but Viktor had centuries more experience and fought with the viciousness his nephew restrained. Go! Mikhail ordered again, blood seeping through his torn shirt and dripping onto the catwalk in soft, rhythmic patterns like macabre rainfall. His eyes locked with hers for a fleeting moment, communicating what words couldn't. Trust me, save him. I'll survive. The blue irises were rimmed with supernatural light, like fire seen through water. I can handle him. Her decision made, Isabella turned and sprinted along the catwalk, gun ready. The metal vibrated beneath her feet, transmitting the impacts of the battling werewolves behind her. Behind her, the sounds of combat intensified. Snarls, impacts, the screech of metal being torn, bones cracking, flesh impacting flesh. The chamber was a labyrinthine structure of interconnected walkways and platforms, making navigation challenging in the shifting patterns of moonlight and shadow. Her lungs burned from the effort and the dusty, stagnant air that seemed to resist being breathed. She reached a junction and paused, getting her bearings. North corner. There. A small control room stood above the main floor, its windows still intact, but clouded with decades of grime, green-hued from aged copper frames. Illuminated briefly by moonlight as clouds parted overhead, it resembled a forgotten aquarium, mysterious and self-contained. Isabella's eyes narrowed as she studied the path. The walkway creaked beneath her feet as she moved toward it, trying to balance speed with stealth. Her boots made soft shuffling sounds despite her best efforts to be silent. Her ears strained for sounds beyond the ongoing battle, hunting for any indication of Damon or Viktor's mercenaries. The young assistant had become more like a brother to her, and he'd followed her into this supernatural nightmare out of loyalty rather than obligation. A shadow detached itself from a pillar ahead, resolving into a man with a tactical vest and semi-automatic weapon. One of Viktor's human henchmen, his face half hidden by a balaclava, eyes cold, assessed the gap between fabric and cap. Isabella reacted without conscious thought, dropping to one knee and firing twice. The harsh report of the gun echoed in the vast space, momentarily drowning out the sounds of combat. The first shot went wide, sparking against metal, the sound of concrete dust falling like soft rain. But the second caught him in the shoulder, the impact spinning him around with a spray of blood that appeared black in the dim light. His weapon clattered to the catwalk, the metal-on-metal sound reverberating through the structure. Before he could recover, Isabella was on him, driving her knee into his wounded shoulder and pressing her gun against his temple. The warm wetness of his blood soaked through her pants, sticky and visceral. Her face settled into the stern expression that had made defense attorneys give her a whole host of unflattering nicknames. "Where's Damon?" she demanded, her voice dangerously quiet. The barrel of her gun pressed into the soft spot beneath his ear, the metal still warm from firing. The man grimaced in pain, eyes darting between her face and the gun. Sweat beaded on his forehead, despite the coolness of the night air. a droplet sliding down to mingle with dirt and blood on his cheek. "Who?" Isabella pressed harder, digging the barrel into soft tissue until he winced. The smell of him, gun oil, sweat, and the metallic tang of blood filled her nostrils. The hostage. Young black man, frizzy hair. Where is he? "Control room," the man gasped, a bead of sweat rolling down his temple despite the coolness of the air. His lip curled in a cruel smile that didn't reach his eyes, which remained flat and cold as river stones. "But you're too late." Orders were to finish him if anything went wrong. His breath smelled of cigarettes and something sharply alcoholic, washing over her face in hot gusts. Cold fear slid down Isabella's spine, but her expression remained impassive. The same mask she'd worn while questioning murderers who described their crimes with relish. She didn't permit a flicker of emotion to show on her face at his words. "How many guards?" "Just Dmitri," he said with a wheezing laugh that ended in a pained cough speckling his lips with blood. "But that's all it takes." The boy screamed real pretty when Dmitri started working on him. "Has a way with a knife, our Dmitri." Something dark and unfamiliar flared in Isabella. A protective rage that belonged more to Mikhail's world than her own, primal and fierce. She brought her elbow to crack against his temple, rendering him unconscious with a precise strike. The impact jarred her arm, sending a bolt of pain up to her shoulder. But the satisfaction of watching his eyes roll back eclipsed the discomfort. She quickly zip-tied his hands with a restraint from her pocket, the plastic making a soft zipping sound as she tightened it, then rolled him into the shadows, his body leaving a smear of blood on the metal like a grotesque signature. The control room was 30 feet ahead, its door slightly ajar. Isabella approached cautiously, heart hammering. She moved on the balls of her feet to minimize sound, though the catwalk still protested softly beneath her weight. From this angle, she could see a portion of the interior through grimy windows. An old desk, a broken chair, papers scattered across the floor, all tinted green by the oxidized copper frames. No sign of Damon or his guard. Behind her, a tremendous crash echoed through the chamber like a bomb detonating, vibrating through the metal beneath her feet. She glanced back to see that Mikhail and Viktor had fallen through a section of catwalk and were now battling on a lower level, surrounded by a cloud of dust and debris that caught the moonlight like silver mist. Mikhail's movements were slightly slower than before, but there was a focused intensity to his fighting now. Less restrained, more feral, as if he'd released something he usually kept chained. Viktor's movements seemed less fluid than before. He was tiring or injured, his attacks still deadly, but lacking their earlier precision. Isabella turned her attention back to the control room and edged closer to the door, the metal coal beneath her fingertips. She could hear nothing from within. No voices, no movement, a silence that did nothing to ease her concern. Taking a deep breath, she pushed it open with her foot, gun raised in a textbook perfect two-handed grip, despite the minimal range time required by the DA's office. The hinges protested with a low groan, the sound unnervingly loud in the silence. The stench hit her first, blood fresh and metallic, mixed with urine and fear, a cocktail of human suffering that made her gag reflexively. The room was small, dominated by an old control panel, covered in dust and rat droppings. Buttons and switches from another era rendered useless by time. Moonlight filtered through the grimy windows, casting long, distorted shadows across the concrete floor. A figure was slumped in the corner, head bowed, hands bound behind his back, a dark pool spreading beneath him that could only be blood. "Damon!" she gasped, rushing forward while scanning for threats. Her weapon tracked her gaze in the practiced movement of someone trained to clear rooms. Her boots slipped slightly in something wet that she refused to identify. He lifted his head weakly, revealing a face she almost didn't recognize. One eye was swollen shut, purple-black, and grotesquely distended. Dried blood caked on his face from a gash across his forehead. His usually immaculate clothing was torn and bloodied, his white shirt now a canvas of crimson and dirt. His glasses were gone, and he looked younger and more vulnerable without them. But his good eye widened in recognition, a spark of life in a face that had seemed moments from death. "Isabella," he croaked, voice raw as though from screaming, lips cracked and bleeding. His gaze flicked past her shoulder, his good eye widening in alarm. "Behind!" The warning came too late. Something heavy slammed into Isabella from behind, driving the air from her lungs in an explosive gasp and sending her sprawling across the floor, her chest impacting concrete with stunning force. Her gun skittered away across the floor, metal scraping against concrete, coming to rest beneath the control panel in a cloud of disturbed dust. She rolled instinctively, ignoring the pain that flared across her ribs, coming face to face with a mountain of a man. Dmitri, presumably. His features set in a cold smile that reminded her of sadistic enforcers she'd prosecuted. "The famous prosecutor," he said, his accent thick Slavic, rolling his R's dramatically, the sound purring in the back of his throat. His breath smelled of vodka and something garlicky, washing over her in nauseating waves. His eyes had the dead flatness of a predator, but a human one. There was none of the supernatural glow she'd seen in Viktor and Mikhail, just ordinary cruelty honed to perfection. "Viktor said you would come. Said you couldn't resist playing hero." Isabella backed away, ignoring the pain that radiated from her ribs with each movement, eyes darting for her weapon. It had slid beneath the control panel, out of immediate reach. Her mind rapidly catalogued potential weapons in the room. Broken chair leg, sharp edge of the metal desk, shards of glass on the floor that glinted in the moonlight. The smell of blood was overwhelming here, making her light-headed metallic tang coating her tongue with each breath. "You're on the wrong side of this, Dmitri," she said, shifting her weight to the balls of her feet, the way she'd been taught in the self-defense classes she'd taken as a teen after her mother's murder. Her voice remained calm. "Viktor's losing. The pack won't forgive humans who help him." Dmitri laughed, the sound of stones grinding filling the small room and bouncing off the concrete walls. "I don't fear dogs. And Viktor pays well." He reached behind his back and withdrew a wicked hunting knife, the blade stained with what looked horribly like fresh blood, parts still wet enough to catch the dim light. "He pays extra for making it slow. For you especially." The blade whistled softly as he cut it through the air, testing its balance. Isabella's back hit the wall, concrete, cold, and unyielding against her spine. Nowhere to run. Dmitri advanced deliberately, savoring her fear like fine wine. With each step, his heavy boots crunched on broken glass, the sound unnaturally loud in the confined space. "Viktor says you think you're smart," he continued conversationally, twirling the knife with practiced ease. the blade catching moonlight as it moved, hypnotic in its deadly dance. That you have all the answers, that you need to be taught respect. He reached out with his free hand, as if to grab her throat, fingers thick as sausages, nails black with dirt and blood. Let's see how smart you are with your tongue cut out. Isabella didn't hesitate. As his hand extended, she ducked under his arm, driving her fist into his kidney with all her strength. Her knuckles connected with solid flesh, the impact jarring her arm up to the shoulder. Dmitri grunted in pain, but recovered quickly. He whirled quickly for his size and was surprisingly light on his feet. The knife slashed towards her face, missing by inches as she backpedaled, the whisper of the blade through the air raising goosebumps on her skin. The blade caught a lock of her hair, slicing it clean with a soft snick sound, the severed strands floating to the floor like dark feathers. "Bitch!" he snarled, all pretense of calm gone. His features contorted with rage, revealing yellowed teeth in a mirthless grin that promised only pain. Spittle flew from his lips as he spoke, flecking his beard. "I'm going to enjoy this even more now." Isabella feinted left, then dove right, scrambling toward the control panel and her gun. Her fingertips brushed the dusty concrete as she lunged, stretching toward the weapon. Dimitri's boot caught her in the ribs with stunning force, sending a shock of pain through her body and knocking the breath from her lungs in an explosive gasp. The impact lifted her slightly off the ground, followed by the sickening crunch of at least one rib giving way. Isabella gasped, curling protectively around the injury, as white-hot pain radiated through her torso, each breath a new agony. Dmitri loomed over her, his bulk blocking the meager light, casting her in shadow. "I think I'll start with your fingers," he said, kneeling beside her and grabbing her wrist in a grip that threatened to grind the small bones together. His skin rough as sandpaper against hers. His breath smelled of cigarettes and vodka, washing over her face in warm, nauseating waves. The knife descended toward her hand, moonlight gleaming along its edge, already stained rust-brown with dried blood. "One joint at a time." Isabella struggled, but his grip was like iron, her movements sending fresh bolts of agony through her injured ribs. The knife drew closer, its tip catching light from the grimy window. A sickening crack filled the room, and the sound of heavy impact against bone was surprisingly loud in the confined space. The heavy base of a broken desk lamp connected with the back of Dimitri's skull, the green glass base shattering on impact, fragments raining down in a glittering shower. The big man's eyes rolled up, showing whites momentarily, and he collapsed sideways with a heavy thud, revealing Damon standing behind him, hands still bound but lamp clutched awkwardly between them. Blood trickled from Damon's split lip, painting his teeth crimson when he grimaced. Still, his good eye blazed with a determination Isabella recognized from court when he refused to let a defense attorney intimidate him. "Worst guard ever," Damon wheezed, his legs trembling with effort. His breath came in shallow pants, face grey with pain beneath smears of blood and dirt. His lip quirked in that half-smile that always appeared when he was trying to minimize danger, a familiar expression in an otherwise barely recognizable face. He didn't even check if the restraints were tight. Total amateur hour. Isabella scrambled up, ignoring the pain in her ribs that stabbed with each movement, and embraced him briefly, careful not to put pressure on what might be hidden injuries. The smell of him, familiar cologne beneath blood and fear sweat, nearly undid her completely. "Are you okay?" she asked raggedly. She pulled back to examine his injuries with the critical eye of someone who had seen too many assault victims, cataloguing the visible damage while calculating potential internal injuries. "Been better," Damon admitted, swaying slightly, his feet shuffling to maintain balance. His skin felt clammy beneath her touch, cool and damp with sweat, signs of shock setting in. Despite his attempt at nonchalance, his face was grey with pain and exhaustion. "But I'm alive, thanks to you." "Let me get those," Isabella said, retrieving her gun from under the control panel. The metal was warm and reassuring in her palm. She then worked to free Damon's hands. The zip ties had cut into his wrists, leaving raw bleeding marks that formed grotesque bracelets of torn flesh. His fingers were swollen, and his nail beds were blue from restricted circulation. "Can you walk?" "Whatever it takes to get out of this hellhole." Isabella glanced down at the slumped form of Dmitri. He was still out cold. She debated whether to try to tie the large man up, but worried it might take more time than they could afford to spend. She helped Damon to the door, peering out cautiously. The catwalk seemed clear, but the sounds of battle had moved again, now coming from somewhere above them, crashes and snarls echoing through the vast open spaces of the facility. A scent of ozone filled the air, like the aftermath of lightning strikes, accompanying the werewolf confrontation. "We need to get you out of here," Isabella said, supporting Damon with one arm while keeping her gun ready with the other. His weight against her sent fresh pain through her injured ribs, but she gritted her teeth against it. Her protective instinct had shifted entirely to her assistant, the young man who had believed in her when no one else would, who had followed her into danger out of loyalty. His arm around her shoulders felt too light, his frame diminished by whatever abuse he'd endured at Viktor's hands. "Is Harper here?" she gasped as she continued to help him forward. Damon shook his head. "If he is, they didn't keep him with me." He continued limping alongside her, each step causing him to wince. "What about Mikhail?" Damon's breathing was labored, coming in shallow gasps that suggested broken ribs or worse. Yet concern for others still dominated his thoughts, the quality that had first impressed her when she hired him fresh out of law school. Idealism intact, despite the cynicism of their profession. Isabella's jaw set in a hard line, muscles tensing beneath her skin. "He can handle Viktor." She tried to sound more confident than she felt, but something in her voice must have betrayed her concern. A slight hitch that Damon, despite his injuries, didn't miss. "Right," Damon nodded, not believing her for a second. "Because he's a..." He lowered his voice to a whisper despite their isolation, as if the words themselves were dangerous. "A werewolf. That's still weird to say out loud." They made slow progress along the catwalk, Damon's injuries making haste impossible. The metal creaked beneath their combined weight, rust flaking away with each step. Isabella kept her senses alert, listening for approaching guards or the outcome of the battle between Mikhail and his uncle. Every sound made her flinch, and the night's events frayed her normally steady nerves. They were halfway to the exit when glass rained down from above, with a musical tinkling, followed by two bodies crashing onto a platform 20 feet away, with an impact that shook the entire structure. Viktor and Mikhail rolled apart, both bloodied and partially transformed. Viktor's expensive clothing hung in tatters, revealing fur-covered flesh beneath that gleamed silver grey in the moonlight. His transformation seemed uncontrolled and patchy, as though his human and wolf aspects were at war, neither thoroughly dominant. Mikhail was more controlled in his shift. His hands had become claws, and his teeth elongated into fangs, but he maintained more of his human appearance. The transformation focused where it served him best. Damon froze, transfixed by the sight of the two wolves. It occurred to Isabella that this was likely the first time she'd see a werewolf partially transformed. "Go," she prompted, helping him toward a ladder that led to the ground floor. The metal was cold beneath her palm, gritty with rust that stained her skin. "Follow the exit signs. The pack should be outside. They'll help you." "What about you?" Damon demanded, even as he moved toward the ladder. His swollen eye was nearly closed now, but the determination in his good eye was unmistakable, glinting with reflected moonlight. Despite his battered state, the stubborn set of his jaw reminded her why she'd selected him as her assistant. He never backed down from what mattered. "I have to make sure Viktor doesn't escape," she replied, her voice hardening into the tone she used when delivering closing arguments in capital cases, calm and implacable as marble. "Not this time." Damon looked like he wanted to argue, but was in no condition, his body betraying his will with trembling limbs and labored breathing. "Be careful," he warned before painfully descending the ladder, each rung an agony for his injured hands. "I'm not filing your overtime if you get yourself killed." The weak attempt at their usual banter made her smile briefly, a flash of normalcy in the nightmare, before she turned back toward the fighting werewolves, raising her gun. She needed a clear shot at Viktor that wouldn't risk hitting Mikhail. But they moved so fast, a brutal dance of violence, that finding such an opportunity seemed impossible. Their forms blurred together at times, separating momentarily before clashing again. Viktor had Mikhail pinned against a railing, claws seeking his throat with deadly precision. Despite his injuries, the older Lycan moved with vicious efficiency born of centuries of practice. The metal railing bent beneath their combined weight, groaning in protest. "I should have killed you years ago," he snarled, flecks of bloody saliva flying from elongated teeth. "Should have torn you apart when you were still a cub." "You tried," Mikhail replied through clenched teeth, muscles straining as he held his uncle's lethal hands at bay, tendons standing out like cables beneath torn skin. Blood streaked his face in grotesque patterns, mixing with sweat that glistened in the moonlight. But his eyes, now glowing with supernatural light, remained focused and clear. "You failed, just like you're failing now." With a surge of strength, Mikhail pushed back, breaking Viktor's hold and delivering a vicious headbutt that cracked against his uncle's forehead with a sound like stone striking stone. Viktor stumbled backward, momentarily dazed, crimson trickling from a split above his eye. Isabella raised her gun, centering the sights on Viktor's chest where the heart would be. Her finger tightened on the trigger, the world narrowing to the perfect alignment of sights and target. A blur of movement to her left was her only warning, as something heavy collided with her, knocking the gun from her grasp with a clang of metal on metal. She hit the catwalk hard, shoulder taking the brunt of the impact, rolling to absorb the force as she'd been taught. The wind was knocked from her lungs a second time, intensifying the pain in her injured ribs. She came face to face with one of Viktor's revenants. This one partially transformed himself, eyes glowing amber with animal light, teeth elongated into points that protruded past his lips. Not a full werewolf, but something in between, caught between forms. Alpha said the human's mine, he growled, lips pulling back in a feral grin that revealed teeth too sharp to be natural, stained yellow near the gums. His scent was wrong, not the clean, earthy smell of Mikhail's pack, but something rotten, decayed, as if his partial nature had turned septic. His smell made her gag, like meat left too long in summer heat. Isabella scrambled backward, boots scraping against metal, but the hybrid was too fast. His hand closed around her ankle, dragging her toward him with supernatural strength, claws puncturing her pants and scraping skin beneath. She kicked out with her free leg, connecting with his jaw hard enough to snap his head back with an audible crack. The impact sent pain shooting up her leg, but his grip didn't loosen, fingers digging deeper. Feisty, he laughed, tugging her closer across the rough metal. The sound was wrong, halfway between human speech and animal noise. I like that. More fun when they fight. Isabella's hand closed around a piece of broken metal on the catwalk, a fragment of railing sheared off during the earlier fighting, its end jagged and sharp. She gripped it tightly, ignoring how it bit into her palm, waiting as he pulled her toward him. Her expression settled into the calm focus that had unnerved even hardened criminals during interrogations, all emotion draining away, leaving only calculated purpose. Viktor promised me a taste, the hybrid said, licking his lips with an unnaturally long tongue, the appendage disturbingly red against his pallid face. Saliva dripped from the corners of his mouth, catching moonlight as it fell. Just a little one. When he dragged her close enough that she could smell his fetid breath, rot and meat and decay, Isabella struck, driving the metal shard into his throat with all her strength. The makeshift weapon sank in with surprising ease, parting flesh with minimal resistance, warm wetness immediately flowing over her hand. His eyes widened in shock, bulging from their sockets, hands releasing her to clutch at the wound, blood pouring between his fingers in thick, dark streams. "I'm not on the menu," she hissed, rolling away as he gurgled and thrashed, crimson spray arcing through the air with each convulsion. The warm wetness of his blood covered her hand, sticky and slick simultaneously, the smell of it filling her nostrils. Not clean like human blood, but tainted somehow, wrong on a fundamental level. Isabella scrambled to her feet, scrabbling for her gun, boots slipping in the hybrid's blood that now coated portions of the catwalk in glistening puddles. She spotted it several feet away, near the platform's edge, moonlight glinting off the barrel. Crawling quickly, she reached for it, fingertips just brushing the textured grip, only to freeze as Viktor suddenly appeared before her, his massive form blocking the moonlight, casting her in shadow that seemed to drop the temperature around her. He was entirely shifted now, standing 7 feet tall on his hind legs, covered in silver-grey fur matted with blood. Crimson stained the fur of his chest and arms, some his, some Mikhail's, gleaming wetly in the moonlight. Behind him, she could see Mikhail struggling to rise, one arm hanging at an unnatural angle, clearly broken, bones visible through torn flesh. "Isabella Santos," Viktor growled, his voice a distorted rumble that barely resembled human speech, more felt in the chest than heard with the ears. His muscle twisted in what might have been a smile, revealing yellowed fangs dripping with saliva that sizzled slightly where they hit the metal floor. His breath washed over her in hot, fetid waves, the smell of old blood and raw meat. The human who dared to challenge a wolf. His clawed hand reached for her, each talon longer than her fingers, curved and deadly as surgical steel. Let me show you what happens to prey that doesn't know its place. Isabella lunged for her gun, fingers closing around the grip as Viktor's claws descended toward her throat, the air itself seeming to part before them.